The communication panel on the Federation research vessel Harmony's Edge began flashing red warning lights as a distress signal broke through the normal space chatter. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her xenobiology research notes and watched as her alien crewmates gathered around the central display screen. The signal was weak and broken, filled with static that made it hard to understand clearly. Vector, the ship's lead scientist, adjusted the receivers with his four thin arms while his large black eyes focused on the incoming transmission. His blue skin showed patches of darker color that Elena had learned meant he was worried or stressed. The other crew members stood quietly behind him, waiting to hear what the message would say. The voice that came through the speakers sounded desperate and afraid. It spoke in the common galactic language that most species used for trade and diplomacy. The speaker identified himself as Elder Morthan from the Villani homeworld, and his words made everyone in the room feel cold with fear. The Villani were known throughout this part of the galaxy as peaceful people who made beautiful art and spent their time thinking about deep questions of life and meaning. They had never been involved in any wars or conflicts with other species. Their worlds were famous for having the most beautiful gardens and the most skilled healers in known space. Elder Morthan's message told a terrible story. Strange ships had appeared in their star system 3 days ago without any warning or attempt to communicate. These ships belonged to a species that called themselves the Kraliks, and they had immediately begun attacking Villani colonies and settlements. The attacks were not random or chaotic, but seemed to follow a careful plan designed to cause the most damage possible. The Kraliks had already destroyed 2 entire worlds, killing millions of Villani civilians who had no weapons or military training to defend themselves. The survivors from these attacks were being taken as prisoners, though no one knew why or where they were being held. The remaining Villani populations had gone into hiding in underground cities and mountain caves, but their supplies would not last much longer. Captain Franke, who commanded the Harmony's Edge, listened to the message with growing concern. His species, the Altarians, valued careful thinking and following proper procedures above all else. He was a good captain who cared about his crew, but he always followed Federation rules exactly as they were written when the message ended. Captain Franke called for an emergency meeting in the main conference room. Elena joined the other senior officers around the oval table while holographic displays showed maps of Villani space and what little information they had about the attacking Kraliks forces. The discussion that followed was frustrating for Elena to listen to. Her alien colleagues all agreed that the situation was terrible and that the Villani people deserved help, but they also agreed that the Federation could not do anything about it. The Villani had never joined the Federation as full members, so there was no treaty that required anyone to defend them. The Federation military was already spread thin across their own territory, dealing with border disputes and pirate attacks. Commander Yilsa, the ship's tactical officer, brought up additional concerns about the Kraliks themselves. From the brief glimpses captured in the distress signal, their ships appeared to be heavily armed and built specifically for warfare. Their technology seemed to be at least equal to Federation standards and possibly more advanced in some areas. Any attempt to fight them would likely result in heavy casualties for Federation forces. Dr. Vexrin, the ship's medical officer, suggested that they could offer humanitarian aid to Villani refugees if any managed to escape their homeworld, but even that would require approval from Federation headquarters. The bureaucratic process could take weeks or months, and by then the Villani people would all be dead or enslaved. Elena listened to all of these arguments while feeling increasingly angry and frustrated. She understood that her colleagues were not being cruel or uncaring, but their way of thinking was completely different from how humans approached these situations. They saw rules and procedures and political complications, where she saw people who needed help right away. After the meeting ended, Elena returned to her quarters and activated her personal communication system. She used special encryption codes that only human military personnel knew about to contact Earth Stellar Command directly. The message would take several hours to reach Earth due to the distance, but she knew it would get through to the right people. She attached the complete Villani distress signal to her report and added her own analysis of the situation. She explained, that the Kralliks appeared to be testing galactic defenses and that their attack on the peaceful Villani might be preparation for larger military campaigns. She also made it clear that time was running out for the Villani survivors. Elena knew that her human commanders would see this situation very differently from her Federation colleagues. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy for being unpredictable and sometimes reckless, but they also had a reputation for keeping their promises and protecting those who asked for help. Other species often found human behavior confusing because humans seemed to ignore their own safety when helping others. The response from Admiral Jake Morrison came back faster than Elena had expected. The message was short and simple, but it contained exactly the words she had hoped to hear. Earth would not abandon the Villani people to their fate. Regardless of Federation politics or military complications, Elena immediately contacted Elder Morthan through the same emergency channels his people had used for their original distress call. She told him that help was coming and that he needed to keep his people alive and hidden until the human forces could arrive. She also began working with him to identify the safest hiding places and the best ways to extend their food and water supplies. The elder was confused by Elena's promise of help, since he had never heard of humans before. When she explained that her people lived on a world called Earth, he seemed surprised that anyone would travel such a great distance to help strangers. Elena tried to explain that this was simply how humans behaved, but she could tell that the concept was difficult for him to understand. Over the next several hours, Elena used her knowledge of different species biology to help the Villani optimize their hiding places. She suggested ways to mask their heat signatures and electromagnetic emissions that might give away their locations to Krallik sensors. She also helped them organize their remaining supplies more efficiently to make them last longer. Meanwhile, she continued receiving updates from Earth about the human military response. The news was encouraging, but also highlighted how desperate the situation had become. Even with human ships traveling at maximum speed, it would take them days to reach Villani space, and every hour that passed meant more Villani lives were at risk. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the Emergency Command Center at Earth's Stellar Command Headquarters, studying the holographic displays that showed everything they knew about the crisis in Villani space. The room was filled with the quiet sounds of officers working at their stations, gathering intelligence and preparing for what everyone knew would be a difficult military operation. The admiral was a tall man with gray hair and weathered features that showed he had spent many years commanding ships in dangerous situations. He had earned his position through decades of service that included fighting pirates, exploring unknown regions of space, and leading rescue missions to help human colonies under attack. His reputation for getting things done quickly had made him the obvious choice to handle this emergency. General Lisa Hayes arrived first for the emergency meeting, followed closely by Colonel Ben Parker and Fleet Commander Ryan Clark. All of them had been pulled away from other important duties, but none of them questioned the priority of this situation. The distress signal from the Villani had been clear enough that everyone understood the urgency. General Hayes was responsible for all human ground forces, including the elite marine units that specialized in fighting in hostile environments. She was shorter than the admiral, but had a presence that made everyone in the room pay attention when she spoke. Her combat experience included some of the toughest battles that human forces had ever fought, and she had never lost a single engagement. Colonel Parker commanded the Special Operations Forces that handled the most dangerous and secretive missions. He was quiet and serious, with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of training soldiers to survive impossible situations. His units were known throughout human space for their ability to complete missions that other forces considered hopeless. Fleet Commander Clark was the youngest person in the room, but he had already proven himself as one of the most skilled tactical minds in the human military. His fleet had won several major battles against superior enemy forces by using unconventional strategies that confused and overwhelmed their opponents. He understood better than most how to use human unpredictability. As a weapon, the meeting began with Dr. Rodriguez's report being displayed on the main screen. The intelligence she had gathered about the Kralliks was limited, but it painted a picture of a dangerous enemy that had been planning this attack for some time. Their ships were heavily armed and armored designed specifically for conquest rather than exploration or trade. Admiral Morrison highlighted the most important details from the report. The Kralliks had attacked without warning or any attempt at negotiation, suggesting they were not interested in diplomatic solutions. They had targeted civilian populations specifically, which indicated they either wanted to cause terror or were taking prisoners for some unknown purpose. Most importantly, their systematic approach to destroying Villani worlds suggested this was not a random raid but part of a larger military campaign. General Hayes brought up the strategic implications of the situation. If the Kralliks were indeed testing galactic defenses, then allowing them to succeed in destroying the Villani would send a message that peaceful species were defenseless. This could encourage other aggressive species to launch similar attacks, potentially creating a wave of conflicts that would destabilize the entire region. The general also pointed out that the Kralliks' expansion pattern showed they were moving in the general direction of human space. While Earth was still many light years away from the immediate threat, the Kralliks might eventually decide to test human defenses as well. It would be better to face them now while they were focused on the Villani rather than wait for them to choose the time and place for a direct confrontation. Colonel Parker's analysis focused on what they knew about Kralliks' military capabilities. The brief glimpses of their ships in the distress signal suggested they relied heavily on energy weapons and heavy armor, which was typical for species that preferred direct confrontation over subtle tactics. This kind of enemy could be dangerous in a straight fight, but they might be vulnerable to the kind of unconventional warfare that human forces specialized in. Fleet Commander Clark presented several possible approaches for the rescue mission. The most direct option would be to assemble the largest possible human fleet and engage the Kralliks in open battle above the Villani homeworld. This would likely succeed, but it would also result in heavy casualties for both human forces and any Villani civilians caught in the fighting. A more subtle approach would involve smaller human forces using hit-and-run tactics to disrupt Kralliks' operations while evacuating Villani survivors. This would save more civilian lives but would take much longer to complete, and there was no guarantee that the Kralliks would not simply destroy the remaining Villani worlds out of frustration. The discussion continued for over an hour as the senior officers considered every possible option and its consequences. They looked at supply requirements, travel times, and the political implications of human forces acting without Federation approval. They also discussed what would happen if the mission failed and human ships were destroyed or captured by the Kralliks. In the end, Admiral Morrison made the decision that everyone in the room had expected him to make. Operation Shepherd's Shield was authorized immediately with full military priority for all resources needed to make it succeed. Human forces would travel to Villani space and engage the Kralliks directly, regardless of the political consequences or military risks involved. Captain Alex Turner was selected to command the main battle group, consisting of the heavy dreadnought Defiant and supporting cruisers Liberty and Endurance. Turner was known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to inspire his crews to fight harder than anyone thought possible. His ships had never retreated from a battle, and his crews trusted him completely. Marine Colonel Kate Sullivan would lead the ground forces, including her elite rapid deployment units that specialized in boarding actions and planetary assault operations. Sullivan had earned her reputation in battles where human Marines had to fight in environments that would kill most other species. Her troops were trained to operate in extreme conditions and to keep fighting even when facing overwhelming odds. The fleet would also include fighter squadrons, support vessels, and mobile repair facilities that could keep the human forces operational even far from their home bases. Everything was designed to give the human commanders maximum flexibility in how they approached the battle with the Kralliks. While the military preparations were moving forward, Admiral Morrison also authorized immediate contact with the Villani leadership through Dr. Rodriguez. The humans wanted to coordinate their arrival with whatever defensive preparations the Villani could manage, and they needed detailed information about Kralliks' positions and movements. Elena received her new orders while she was still aboard the Harmony's Edge. helping Elder Morthen organize the survival efforts for his people. She was now officially designated as the primary liaison between human forces and the Villani government, with full authority to make tactical decisions based on the situation as it developed. The Elder was amazed when Elena explained that an entire human battle fleet was already traveling toward his homeworld. He had never heard of any species responding so quickly to a call for help, especially from strangers they had never met before. Elena tried to explain that this was normal behavior for humans, but she could see that the concept was still difficult for him to understand. Over the next several hours, Elena worked with the Villani to identify the best locations for human forces to arrive without being detected by Kralik sensors. She also helped them establish communication networks that would allow coordination between human commanders and Villani resistance groups when the battle began. The Kraliks had not been idle during this time, and reports from Villani observers indicated that more enemy ships were arriving in their system every day. The aliens seemed to be building up for a major assault on the remaining Villani worlds, possibly planning to finish their conquest before any outside help could arrive. Elena passed all of this information back to the approaching human fleet, along with her recommendations for the best approach to the battle. She emphasized that time was running out and that the Kraliks appeared to be preparing for a final attack that would eliminate the last Villani survivors. The human task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Villani territory with the precision timing that had become a trademark of Earth's military operations. Captain Alex Turner stood on the bridge of the Dreadnought Defiant, watching as his tactical displays updated with information about the local space environment. The Kraliks had been busy during their occupation, and their ships were spread throughout the system in what appeared to be a methodical search pattern. Turner was a veteran commander who had earned his reputation in battles against pirates and hostile alien species along the frontier. He was tall and lean, with sharp eyes that missed nothing important and a calm manner that kept his crew focused even in the most dangerous situations. His officers had learned to trust his judgment completely, knowing that he never made decisions lightly but never hesitated when action was needed. Commander Sarah Walsh, his tactical officer, was already analyzing the enemy positions and identifying potential weaknesses in their deployment. She was younger than most senior officers but had proven herself to be one of the most skilled combat analysts in the human fleet. Her ability to read enemy intentions and predict their movements had saved many human lives in previous battles. The Kraliks patrol fleet that detected the human arrival consisted of 6 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller escort vessels. These ships were built with the angular, aggressive design philosophy that seemed to be common among warrior species throughout the galaxy. Their hulls were covered with weapon ports and armor plating that gave them a threatening appearance even when they were not actively fighting. Warcast Drakmer commanded the Kraliks patrol from his flagship, a massive vessel that was nearly as large as Turner's dreadnought. He was a typical member of his species with thick armor-like skin, powerful limbs designed for combat, and the kind of aggressive mindset that viewed every encounter as a potential battle to be won or lost. His crew had never faced defeat in any of their previous conquests. The first communication between the two fleets established the fundamental difference in their approaches to conflict resolution. Captain Turner opened a channel using standard galactic protocols and delivered a simple message demanding that the Kraliks forces withdraw from Villani space immediately. He spoke in the calm, professional tone that human military officers used when they were serious about enforcing their demands. Drakmer's response was filled with contempt and dismissive arrogance. He had never heard of humans before and assumed they were just another weak species trying to interfere with Kraliks' military operations. The Warcast commander made it clear that he had no intention of retreating from territory that his forces had already claimed through conquest. When Turner refused to withdraw his own forces, Drakmer decided to demonstrate Kralik superiority through immediate military action. His ships moved into attack formation and began charging their primary weapon systems, following the standard Kralik's doctrine of overwhelming firepower, applied without warning or mercy. The battle that followed revealed the fundamental differences between human and galactic approaches to warfare. Most species in the galaxy had developed military technologies that emphasized either defensive capabilities or offensive firepower, but rarely both at the same time. The Kralliks were typical in this regard, having focused almost entirely on building ships that could dish out massive amounts of damage while accepting that they would take significant casualties in return. Human military doctrine was completely different, having been developed through centuries of warfare against other humans, who shared the same innovative and unpredictable nature. Human ships were designed to be survivable and flexible, capable of adapting to changing tactical situations and continuing to fight. Even when severely damaged, Commander Walsh coordinated the human response to the Kralliks' attack using tactics that immediately confused the enemy commanders. Instead of meeting the Kralliks' charge with a counterattack, the human ships began a fighting retreat that drew the aliens deeper into what appeared to be a carefully prepared trap, Lieutenant Commander. Nick Foster led one of the human cruiser squadrons in what seemed to be a suicidal assault against two Kralliks heavy cruisers. His ships took severe damage from the enemy's superior firepower, but they managed to cripple both targets before withdrawing. The Kralliks were shocked by the human willingness to accept casualties in order to achieve tactical objectives. Commander Julie Martinez commanded the human fighter squadrons that launched from the fleet carriers, and her pilots immediately demonstrated the kind of aggressive tactics that had made human aerospace forces famous throughout known space. Her fighters used kamikaze-style attacks that horrified both the Kralliks and the Villani, observers who were watching the battle from their hiding places. The human fighters would approach Kralliks' vessels at maximum speed, firing all of their weapons at point-blank range before pulling away at the last possible moment. Many of the pilots did not survive these attacks, but they inflicted far more damage than the Kralliks had expected from such small vessels. Drakmar found himself facing an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous as the battle became more desperate, which was completely contrary to his experience with other galactic species. Most opponents became more cautious and defensive when they started taking casualties, but the humans appeared to become more aggressive and unpredictable instead. The running battle continued for several hours as the human fleet led the Kralliks' forces deeper into Villani space. Captain Turner was following a carefully planned strategy that would bring the enemy to the location where Admiral Morrison was waiting with the main human battle group, but he could not reveal this plan without compromising the tactical advantage. The Kralliks' pursuit was relentless, driven by their commander's certainty that he could destroy this unknown enemy once he brought them to decisive battle. Drakmar had never encountered a species that fought like the humans, and he was beginning to feel frustrated by their refusal to engage in the kind of direct confrontation that his forces were designed to win. Elena Rodriguez watched the approaching battle from her position aboard a Villani command ship hidden in the outer system. She was coordinating between the human fleet and the Villani resistance groups, providing intelligence about Kralliks' positions and helping to guide civilian evacuations away from the combat zones. Elder Morthen and his surviving leaders were amazed by the human willingness to fight against such overwhelming odds. The Kralliks' force pursuing Captain Turner's ships was twice the size of the human fleet, yet the humans showed no signs of fear or hesitation. This kind of courage was almost incomprehensible to the peace-loving Villani. The elder asked Elena why. Her people were willing to risk so much for strangers they had never met, as she tried to explain the human concept of moral obligation. She told him that humans believed that those who had the power to help others had a responsibility to use that power, regardless of the personal cost or political complications involved. As the chase continued, more Kralliks reinforcements began moving toward the battle zone from their positions throughout the Villani system. Drakmar was calling in additional ships to ensure that the unknown enemy would be completely destroyed when they were finally brought to battle. He wanted to make an example of these humans that would discourage any other species from interfering. With Kralliks' operations, the human ships continued their fighting retreat, leaving a trail of disabled Kralliks' vessels and debris clouds that marked the locations of the most intense combat. Captain Turner's crews were performing magnificently under pressure. maintaining their ship's combat effectiveness even while taking continuous enemy fire. Commander Walsh's tactical analysis showed that the plan was working perfectly. The Kralliks were being drawn exactly where Admiral Morrison wanted them, and their focus on pursuing Turner's fleet was preventing them from noticing the main human battle group that was waiting in ambush near the Villani homeworld. The climax of this phase of the battle came when the Kralliks finally succeeded in cornering part of the human fleet near a gas giant in the outer system. Drakmar was certain that he had finally trapped his elusive enemy and could now demonstrate the full power of Krallik's military superiority. Lieutenant Commander Foster's damaged cruiser Valiant was cut off from the rest of the human fleet and surrounded by Krallik's vessels demanding surrender. Instead of complying, Foster chose to ram his ship into the nearest Krallik's heavy cruiser, destroying both vessels in a massive explosion that shocked the alien commanders. This act of desperate courage was exactly the kind of behavior that made humans so difficult for other species to understand or predict. The Kralliks had expected the isolated human ship to surrender when faced with certain destruction, but instead they witnessed a display of sacrifice that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. The battle reached its turning point when the surviving human ships finally reached the Villani homeworld and found Admiral Morrison's main battle group waiting in perfect formation. The Kralliks' pursuit fleet suddenly realized they had been led into a trap, but it was too late to withdraw without accepting a humiliating defeat. Admiral Morrison's battle group emerged from their concealed positions around the Villani homeworld like predators that had been waiting patiently for their prey to arrive. The heavy dreadnought Indomitable led the formation, accompanied by a full squadron of cruisers and destroyers that had been hidden behind the planet's larger moons. Captain Greg Mitchell commanded the flagship with the same calm professionalism that had made him one of the most respected officers in the human fleet. Warcast. Drakmar realized immediately that he had been outmaneuvered by an enemy he had underestimated from the beginning. His pursuit fleet was now trapped between Captain Turner's retreating ships and Admiral Morrison's fresh battle group, facing superior numbers for the first time in this campaign. The Kralliks commander's confidence began to waver as he understood that these humans had been planning this confrontation from the moment they entered Villani space. The battle that followed would become legendary in human military history as an example of how Earth's forces could turn their greatest weakness into their most powerful advantage. Other galactic species had always viewed humans as reckless and unpredictable, unable to follow proper military doctrine or make rational tactical decisions. The Kralliks were about to learn why these apparent weaknesses made humans the most dangerous opponents in known space. Admiral Morrison opened the engagement by broadcasting a final ultimatum to the Kralliks' fleet, demanding their immediate surrender and withdrawal from all Villani territory. His message was delivered in the same calm, professional tone that human commanders always used, but there was an underlying steel in his voice that made it clear he was prepared to back up his words with overwhelming force. Drakmar's response was predictably aggressive, as he ordered his ships to attack the nearest human vessels with everything they had. The Kralliks' warcast had built their entire civilization around the concept that superior firepower could overcome any tactical disadvantage, and their commander was not prepared to abandon this philosophy even when facing obvious defeat. The opening exchange of fire demonstrated the technological differences between the two fleets. Kralliks' weapons were designed to deliver massive amounts of damage through concentrated energy beams that could punch through heavy armor plating. Human weapons were more versatile, using a combination of energy and kinetic systems that could adapt to different tactical situations. Captain Mitchell's tactical officer, Commander Pete Anderson, coordinated the human response with the precision that came from years of training and combat experience. The human ships used their superior maneuverability to avoid the heaviest Kralliks' weapons, while concentrating their own fire on the most vulnerable enemy vessels. The real advantage of human forces became apparent when the battle moved into close quarters combat. Most galactic species avoided this kind of fighting because it was too dangerous and unpredictable, but humans had learned to excel in exactly these conditions. Marine Colonel Kate Sullivan's boarding parties were already preparing to assault Krallick's vessels, using tactics that would have been considered suicidal by any other species. Colonel Sullivan was a veteran of dozens of boarding actions against hostile ships, and her Marines were trained to fight in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. They wore powered armor that allowed them to survive in hard vacuum, toxic atmospheres, and radiation levels that exceeded the tolerance of even the most hardy alien races. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Rivera led the first boarding assault against a disabled Krallick's cruiser, taking her special forces team through hull breaches that were still venting atmosphere and debris into space. Her troops moved through compartments filled with poisonous gases and electromagnetic radiation, clearing enemy resistance with an efficiency that horrified the surviving Krallick's crew members. The Krallick's had never encountered an enemy that was willing and able to fight inside damaged spacecraft under conditions that should have been instantly lethal. Their own warriors were tough and aggressive, but they required environmental support systems and protective equipment that limited their effectiveness. In extreme situations, human Marines fought with a ferocity that seemed to increase as conditions became more dangerous. They used the hostile environment as a weapon, deliberately causing hull breaches and atmospheric leaks that would force Krallick's defenders to retreat to more secure areas. This kind of environmental warfare was completely outside the experience of the alien warriors. The turning point of the battle came when Commander Anderson's cruiser Valiant was severely damaged by concentrated Krallick's fire and began losing power to critical systems. Most galactic commanders would have ordered the ship to withdraw or surrender to prevent the loss of life that would result from continued fighting. Instead, Anderson chose to ram his damaged vessel directly into the Krallick's command ship, using the last of his engine power to accelerate to maximum speed before impact. The collision destroyed both ships in a spectacular explosion that could be seen from the Villani homeworld surface, but it also eliminated the primary Krallick's command vessel and left their fleet without effective coordination. This act of deliberate sacrifice was exactly the kind of behavior that made humans incomprehensible to other species. The Krallick's had expected the damaged human ship to attempt escape or surrender, but instead they witnessed a display of courage that went against every rational military calculation. Elder Morthan and the surviving Villani leaders watched the battle from their underground bunkers, trying to understand what they were seeing. The humans were fighting with an intensity and determination that seemed to defy basic survival instincts. They were taking casualties that would have broken the morale of any other species, yet they continued to press their attacks with undiminished aggression. The elder asked Elena Rodriguez why her people were willing to die for strangers they had never met, and she tried to explain the human concept of duty and honor. She told him that humans believe some things were more important than individual survival, including the protection of innocent people who could not defend themselves. As the battle continued, more examples of human courage and sacrifice became apparent to the alien observers. Lieutenant Commander Jenny Ross coordinated suicide runs by damaged fighter craft to protect evacuation ships carrying Villani civilians. Her pilots flew their burning aircraft directly into Krallick's weapons emplacements, trading their lives to save people they had never spoken to. The Krallick's began to understand that they were facing an enemy, unlike any they had encountered before. These humans seemed to become more dangerous as they took casualties, fighting with increasing desperation and creativity that made them impossible to predict or counter effectively. Warcast Drakmar found his fleet being systematically destroyed by opponents who refused to follow any recognized patterns of military behavior. His ships were designed to fight enemies that would retreat when faced with superior firepower, but the humans seemed to interpret heavy casualties as a reason to fight harder rather than withdraw. The Krallick's commander tried to rally his remaining forces for a final assault that would break human resistance through sheer overwhelming force. He concentrated his surviving heavy ships into a single formation and ordered them to advance directly toward Admiral Morrison's flagship, hoping to destroy the human command structure and force their fleet to surrender. The human response to this desperate attack demonstrated why Earth's military forces had never been successfully invaded despite being relative newcomers to galactic civilization. Instead of retreating in the face of superior firepower, Morrison's ships moved forward to meet the Kralliks' assault head-on. Accepting battle on terms that should have favored their enemies, Captain Mitchell's gunnery crews poured everything they had into the approaching Kralliks formation, while his damage control teams worked frantically to keep their ship operational despite taking hits from multiple enemy vessels. The Indomitable's armor was being systematically stripped away by Kralliks' energy weapons, but the ship continued to fight with undiminished effectiveness. Marine assault teams launched from the human ships even as the battle reached its climax, using the confusion of close-range combat to board and capture key Kralliks vessels. Colonel Sullivan personally led the assault on Drakmar's flagship, fighting through corridors filled with smoke and radiation to reach the enemy command center. The sight of human Marines advancing through conditions that should have been instantly fatal finally broke Kralliks' morale. Their warriors had been trained to fight other species that shared their limitations and vulnerabilities, but they had no experience dealing with enemies that seemed to thrive in hostile environments. When Colonel Sullivan's assault team reached the Kralliks bridge, they found Warcast Drakmar and his surviving officers in a state of shock and confusion. The alien commander could not understand how his superior fleet had been defeated by opponents who seemed to ignore basic military principles and survival instincts. The battle ended with the complete destruction or capture of the Kralliks' invasion fleet, but the cost in human lives had been significant. Admiral Morrison's victory had been achieved through the kind of sacrifice and determination that other species found difficult to comprehend, proving once again that humans were unlike any other race in the galaxy. The silence that followed the battle was broken only by the emergency signals from damaged ships and the radio chatter of rescue operations throughout the Villani system. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as his crews worked to secure the captured Kralliks vessels and tend to their wounded comrades. The victory had been complete, but it had come at a price that reminded everyone involved why humans were both feared and respected throughout the galaxy. Warcast Drakmar sat in the detention center aboard the human flagship, staring at the bulkheads with the confused expression of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered in a single day. The Kralliks commander had spent his entire life believing that superior firepower and aggressive tactics could overcome any opponent, but the humans had defeated his fleet using methods that defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. Colonel Kate Sullivan entered the detention area to formally accept the Kralliks' surrender, accompanied by 2 Marine guards who kept their weapons ready but not directly threatening. She was still wearing her battle-damaged armor, and the scorch marks and dents in the metal plates told the story of the brutal fighting that had taken place during the boarding actions. The colonel was surprised when Drakmar asked her why the humans had shown mercy to defeated enemies instead of executing them as examples to discourage future resistance. She tried to explain that humans distinguished between soldiers following orders and leaders who chose to make war on innocent civilians, but she could see that this concept was foreign to the Kralliks' way of thinking throughout the Villani system. Human ships were already beginning the complex work of liberation and reconstruction. Captain Greg Mitchell coordinated the rescue operations that freed thousands of Villani prisoners from Kralliks' detention facilities on the conquered worlds. The condition of these civilians showed clearly why the humans had been right to intervene. When they did, the freed Villani were weak from poor treatment and inadequate food, but they were alive thanks to the speed of the human response. Many of them had never seen humans before, and they were amazed by the gentle care that the same warriors who had fought so fiercely were now providing to former enemies and rescued civilians alike. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked closely with Elder Morthan to coordinate the humanitarian relief efforts that would be needed to restore Villani civilization. The damage caused by the Kralliks' occupation was extensive, but it was not beyond repair if sufficient resources and expertise could be brought to bear on the problems. The Elder was struggling to understand how the same species that had fought with such terrible violence could now be working so patiently to heal the wounds of war. Elena tried to explain that humans saw no contradiction between fighting fiercely to protect innocent people and then working equally hard to help those same people rebuild their lives afterward. Admiral Morrison's first priority was establishing a secure perimeter around Volani space to prevent any additional Kralix forces from threatening the recovery efforts. Captain Alex Turner was placed in command of the patrol squadrons that would maintain constant surveillance of the surrounding star systems, ready to intercept any hostile ships that might attempt to continue the Kralix campaign. The news of the human victory spread quickly through galactic communication networks, causing shock and amazement among the various species that made up the broader interstellar community. Most alien governments had assumed that the Volani were doomed when the Kralix attacked, since no major power had been willing to risk their own forces to help a non-aligned species. The Federation Council called an emergency session to discuss the implications of human military intervention without proper authorization or consultation with established galactic authorities. Ambassador Linda Carter represented Earth's interests in these discussions, and her presentation made it clear that humanity would not apologize for saving innocent lives. Carter was a skilled diplomat who had spent years building relationships with alien governments, but she was also a former military officer who understood the realities of interstellar conflict. Her speech to the Council was carefully crafted to explain human motivations without sounding defensive or apologetic about the actions that had been taken. She told the assembled representatives that humans would always respond to genuine calls for help from peaceful species, regardless of their political affiliations or membership status in various galactic organizations. Earth would not stand by and watch genocide take place simply because the victims had not filled out the proper paperwork or paid the required membership fees. The ambassador also made it clear that humanity expected the same consideration from other species when human colonies or interests were threatened by hostile forces. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place, and survival would require cooperation between all peaceful species rather than strict adherence to bureaucratic procedures. Many of the alien representatives were uncomfortable with the precedent that human actions had established, but they could not argue with the results. The Volani people were alive and free because humans had been willing to act when everyone else had chosen to remain on the sidelines. Elder Morthan formally requested human protection for all Volani territory, offering his people's knowledge of art, philosophy, and advanced medical techniques in exchange for military security. This arrangement would make Volani space the first non-human territory to come under formal human protection, establishing a new model for interstellar relationships. The signing ceremony took place on the Volani homeworld, in a beautiful garden that had somehow survived the Kralix occupation. Elena Rodriguez served as the primary liaison between the two species, helping to translate not just languages but also the cultural concepts that made cooperation possible. Captain Turner established a permanent human garrison on a converted space station that was renamed Sanctuary and positioned at the edge of Volani space. Colonel Mitchell took command of this facility, which would serve as headquarters for the new Sector Defense Command, responsible for protecting all human allies in the region. The human military presence was deliberately designed to be non-threatening to the Volani while remaining capable of deterring any future attacks by hostile species. The garrison included defensive platforms, patrol ships, and rapid response units that could deploy to any threatened location within hours rather than days. Dr. Rodriguez received a promotion and a new assignment as Earth's first interspecies relations coordinator, with responsibility for identifying other vulnerable species that might benefit from human protection. Her success in managing the Volani crisis had proven that humans could work effectively with alien partners when mutual respect and shared values provided the foundation for cooperation. Her first task in this new role was to investigate reports from 3 other species that had sent discreet inquiries to Earth about the possibility of protection agreements. These included a group of peaceful traders who were being harassed by pirates, a scientific colony that had discovered something valuable and dangerous, and a farming community that was being pressured by an aggressive neighbor. Elena's final Report on the Villani crisis concluded that the operation had demonstrated both the strengths and the challenges of human expansion through alliance building rather than conquest. The military victory had been decisive, but the real success would be measured by how well the two species could work together. Over the coming years, the report also noted that other aggressive species would be watching human actions carefully, trying to determine whether Earth's forces could be defeated by different tactics or superior numbers. The Krallick's defeat had established human military credibility, but it had also painted a target on every human colony and allied world in the galaxy. Admiral Morrison's strategic assessment was more blunt in its conclusions. The human military had proven it could defeat conventional enemy forces through superior tactics and the willingness to accept casualties that other species found unacceptable. However, future conflicts would likely involve enemies who had studied human methods and developed countermeasures. The Admiral recommended immediate expansion of human fleet strength and the establishment of additional bases throughout the frontier regions where human allies were most vulnerable. He also suggested that Earth should begin training allied species in human military techniques, creating a network of mutually supporting defense forces. The Krallick's prisoners provided valuable intelligence about other aggressive species in their region of space, including several that were reportedly planning their own expansion campaigns. This information suggested that the Villani crisis had been just the beginning of a larger period of interstellar conflict. Warcast Drakmar was eventually released and allowed to return to Krallick's territory, carrying with him a message from Admiral Morrison that any future attacks on human allies would result in direct retaliation against Krallick's homeworlds. The alien commander had been fundamentally changed by his experience of defeat and captivity, and his reports to his own government would influence Krallick's policy for years to come. 6 months after the battle, the Villani homeworld hosted a memorial ceremony honoring the human servicemen and women who had died defending people they had never met. Elder Morthen spoke about the courage,